guest that we have for tonight has a checkered history and background. I'm sure some of them will touch on, but let me push some highlights. Let me pick a few things and then share them with you. Apart from the training that she does on leadership and the coaching that she does very powerfully when it comes to bringing a certain presence to the space where she works, one of the people that stands out in this field. I have had the privilege of working with Taaka very close, some few projects, and I can tell you, I got to learn so many things. Once you encounter Taaka, you don't leave the same. And tonight, you have this privilege. I can tell you, your life will be blessed. She, apart from her training and coaching work, she also serves on a lot of boards. That tells you that she contributes to the development of a lot of companies and a lot of things that are happening on the African continent. She stands out. One of them is the fact that she's currently the chair of the board for the African Women's Development Fund. As the chair, she's been on the board for a while. Taaka Awori, our guest for tonight, also holds a bachelor from Harvard University in political science. She has a Juris Doctor in law from Columbia University, New York, USA. She's certified organizational development practitioner. She's also certified from the Gestalt Institute as a facilitator. She does OD work, she does training, she does coaching, and for her coaching, she has the certification from the International Coaching Academy from Australia. And these things, when you hear them, you know that the one that we have for tonight is going to share so much with us. This is just brief. So Taaka, I would want you to also introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Daniel.
Apart from being my wife's boss, who is Taaka?
And your colleague, and having had the honor of working closely with you. Thank you so much. I'm humbled by those kind words and really thankful to be here. I think one of the things when I'm introducing myself, people are always curious about, so I always want to put them out of their misery, is because they're always wondering, this one, where is she from? We can't quite place the accent. We're not sure. She doesn't sound Ghanaian. Is she from this place? So I think let me start there in terms of introducing myself. So I was born in Uganda and hold a Ugandan passport, but I always tell people, Daniel, you've heard me say this to folks before, that my family on the Ugandan side is from the Aflao of Kenya and Uganda. So we're from the border, and those of you who are border people will know what it means. So you have family that are on both sides of the line. So most of my family is actually Kenyan. So I'm Ugandan, but most of my family on my dad's side is Kenyan. My mother is from Liberia. So Liberia is equally home for me, and my children are Ghanaian. So, and the place I've lived, actually now the place I've lived longest in my entire life, amounting to 17 years, is Ghana. So really, Ghana is where the place I call home. So that's where I'm from. I think you have a sense of what I do, and you rightly said it, Daniel. Leadership is everything I do. I love the way you put it. I eat it, I breathe it, I drink it, I eat it. It's been my passion for over a decade. So that's what I do: leadership training, coaching, facilitation, and most recently wrote a book on leadership, which I'm sure we'll come to later. So that's me.
Thank you very much, Taaka. So Taaka, your schooling, you started schooling in Ghana?
I wish. My schooling has been very much a reflection of the disruption of African politics. Because my father was in politics, so my upbringing was not in one place. It required moving around because of the vagaries politics. So as much as I was born in Uganda, because of Idi Amin, we had to flee from Uganda as refugees and go to Kenya. So I started kindergarten and my first primary school in Kenya. My mom, you know, her profession was very much in the development sector, so moving around. So she got a job in the UK. So I finished primary school in the UK after being in Kenya for about 5 years, lived in the UK for about 4 years. Then my parents were concerned that we were very disconnected from Uganda. Huh? And Uganda has a similar system, Daniel, to Ghana, where the boarding schools that you go to give you such a firm foundation and connection to society. Those are the friendships you form for life. And my parents were very concerned that we had done up to then, me and my siblings were 5 of us, up to then, we never had any schooling in Uganda, and therefore didn't have any strong bonds in Uganda. So my parents yanked us out of school in the UK and put us in boarding school in Uganda. So I went to an all-girls school very similar to Wesley Girls or Ebri Girls, huh? You know, one of those types of schools. Huh? So did that for a year and a half until politics came again to disrupt my life. Many of you are familiar with Museveni's history and how he fought his way into power. So the war got so bad that my parents had to pull us out again. And by now, I was entering high school. I literally had my last 3 years of high school. And this time I was yanked out of Uganda to the US. That's where my dad was now working with the embassy, the Ugandan embassy. So I finished high school in the US, did my, as you mentioned, my first degree in political science in the US, took a year after that and lived in Morocco for a year. I was very interested in Islam. I was interested in French. I was interested in Arabic and just thought, let me check this out. So I spent a year in Morocco and then went back to the US to do my law degree in New York at Columbia. Finished that and then practiced law for 3 years in the US. You know, like many of you may be aware, American tertiary education is very expensive. So I came out of school in debt, highly in debt, and I needed to pay that money back. So I had to work for a couple of years, paid it off, and then Daniel, I did what I truly wanted to always do, which was human rights work. So I bought a one-way ticket home. I didn't wait to get the green card or the infamous blue book. I said, me, I know what I'm called to do. So I moved back to Uganda to do the human rights work I'd always dreamed of. So that was my journey in terms of my education and first jobs.
Wonderful. I mean, considering all the African countries that you've mentioned, it sounds like you're an African woman.
Yes, you know, I keep saying, you've heard me say it again before, that I'm tired of this one nationality passport. What I really want is the AU passport that reflects my Pan-African roots, because I see that the Pan-African vision that Nkrumah had will actually not come by waiting for governments. It'll come through families. It will come through people marrying each other, where you start to say, oh, my sister-in-law is from Namibia, and my cousin is from so-and-so, and my children is so-and-so. You know, when people of different nationalities become your relatives, they cease to become the other, because now they're your family. So it's through intermarriage and families that we will realize Nkrumah's vision of one Africa.
All right. So here you are, you combine Kenya, Uganda, Ghana. I hear the names of Yamisi, Sama.
Yes, yes.
And that sounds very African.
Liberian, yes.
Wonderful. So Taaka, in terms of professional life, you started off with the law. And how did we get to Busara?
Yes. You know, it's interesting. I've always followed my passion. And I say particularly to many young people who are unsure about what path to take, what decision to take, what career to make. I said, don't stress over it, because gone are the times where you'll have one career for life. I was counting the other day, and I think I'm on my 5th career. So I really go where I feel my passion is, where God is calling me. And it has been different things. So I did start out knowing for a long time that it was human rights that was my passion. So by the time I even went to undergrad and law school, human rights was my passion. At law school, I was featured on the Human Rights Law Review. So my first role was in human rights. But however, that human rights was very focused on civil and political rights. So I did work around making sure at that time, again, because we had the Lord's Resistance Army, there was a conflict in the north of Uganda. So there was lots of issues around torture. When there's insecurity, you can see government starts to use all kinds of means to manage that. So I was focusing on things like ensuring there is no torture, looking at things around prisoners' rights. But Daniel, I realized something was missing around social and economic rights, issues around poverty, the right to education, the right to health, women's rights. And I'm like, the way I'm focusing on on human rights is limited. So from there, I moved into actually looking more specifically at women's rights. And so, Daniel, I worked with a small consultancy firm and with an amazing woman who was my mentor. And one of her niche areas was women's rights, but more importantly, she knew how to train and facilitate. So it was with her, she also had a legal background. It was from her that I learned how to train and facilitate and strengthen others' capacity to be better. So I was doing things like training judges and magistrates around children's rights, around women's rights, how to interpret some of the international declarations in human rights in their adjudication. And from there, Daniel, I moved to more broader human rights. I used to work for DFID. Now, that was interesting to me, Daniel, because at a certain point, I realized that the development work I was doing was dealing with symptoms. So I kept feeling I was coming in to say, okay, how can a particular agency build a school to help children who are not in school? How can they come to complement government in terms of what's happening? And then I started to say, no, we need to ask deeper questions about what are the systemic and underlying reasons why you have a certain group of people in poverty and others not? What is this about inequality, and how can we change the rules of the game? So some people are not finding that they're chronically left out. No matter how hard they try, they find because they've been born in the wrong side of the country. And in our case, just like Ghana, sometimes it's also the northern part of the country when you start to see levels of inequality. So just because you're born on that side of the country, the quality of education you get is lower, then therefore your ability to get into tertiary is lower, and then therefore your ability to have more social. So these were questions I was asking Daniel, and that led me to being very interested in policy work, to saying, how can I support governments to formulate policies that are more responsive to a wider group of people? How do I work with governments to but to put in place institutions to ensure that we have ministries that are paying attention to those who are usually left out? So that's how I got into broader development work, and then eventually found myself doing leadership work. That's my passion. So it's almost as if I have been called, I have been moved to try and make a difference in transforming Africa in different ways. So one minute it might be through human rights, next minute it might be women's rights, next minute it might be more broader development, next minute it might be more leadership. But the core thread has been, Taaka, what are you doing to make a difference on this continent. And that is something that was ingrained in us as children. My parents were very clear. They'd always say, don't expect anybody to fix Africa other than you. Who are you expecting to do it? Are you expecting the Muzungu, i.e. the Obrodi, to come and fix Africa? If you won't fix Africa, who do you expect to do it? So don't complain if you are not part of fixing this continent. So I think what you're hearing as the development is that passion around trying to make sure I leave this continent a better place than I found it.
Taaka, I want to use one of the words that you use often. I want us to unpack passion.
Yes.
Let's talk a bit about passion, because you have had passion for different areas. Now, someone may be on with us and wondering, am I on the right path? Am I in the right space? Is this what I want to do? And I just want, can you share with us, how did you navigate yours?
You know, I've been blessed in being able to have role models of parents who have followed what causes their hearts to sing, even though it has costed them. For instance, you know, to be in politics in Africa that's high stakes game, high stakes game, and I could see that my dad was clearly called to it, despite the cost, not just to him but to all of us. It's almost like it was so much in his blood. So when you see that as an example, as a child, you start to realize that it's actually okay. I never got signals that you just had to do a job for the sake of a job. And so I started to pay attention to literally, very simply, what gives me joy? What gives me a deep sense of satisfaction? What makes me feel accomplished? And because I have worked for a number of years, particularly when I was working in my first job in the law firm, in what I call a soul-numbing, soul-crushing role, I know the difference to be in a job that is draining you, that it's not aligned to your calling, versus doing something that you may not be getting paid a lot for, but you're like, this is where I'm meant to be. You feel it literally in your, again, you feel it in your bones, you feel it in your heart, but this is where I'm meant to be. So when we unpack passion, to me, it's a combination of a deep knowing that you're on your path. It's a sense of joy that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And it's also often you find a matching of the gifts you have brought to this earth with what is needed. It's often about service. I found it hard for people to be quite passionate about something if there isn't some element of service, or being of service to others. So to me, those are some of the things that are part of what has driven me. And I can also tell Daniel when my passion goes.
You can tell.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I knew when I was done with development work. I was like, not completely done, but I was like, it's more that, no, there's this other thing that I'm more passionate about now. And to me, when leadership became the thing for me, it was leadership just became everything. It was not the same with just development. It was really now leadership was the main thing.
Taaka, let's talk a bit about.
Sorry, go ahead. You go ahead.
You make peace.
You make peace with the fact that you change. That as you, and it's okay. I think people think you must be stuck to one thing. I currently know a woman who was a pilot for years, and now she's changing. She wants to be a coach, a therapist, and I said it's okay. I think many times God is speaking to us in different ways to say, and my big message I often say is use me, use me. And in some sense, it might be you get a message saying, okay, I've used you in this, I need you somewhere else. So please, let's use you somewhere else. So that willingness to surrender to what's coming, what you're being called to, I think enables you to say, yeah, I finished my time here. and it's okay to try something else now.
Thank you very much, Taaka. Taaka, what about the leadership and your journey? When did it start? When did you get conscious of this whole concept of leadership? Primary one or before primary one?
Oh no, this is more recent. This is 10 years. It's only been 10 years, huh? Because it really came, actually maybe more, because it came when I got my first leadership role, when I was appointed the country director for ActionAid Ghana. And I always say it was a realization. It was a very hot, one of those hot, steamy Accra mornings. Huh? And I was sitting there in my office and I realized, oh my gosh, these people, they recruited me for a set of skills that are not required in this job. They recruited me because I was very good at doing the policy analysis that I talked about before. I was very good at the women's rights. I was very good at technical things around development because of my journey. And I realized what was needed for me as country director at a point when ActionAid, we had about 120 people in 6 different offices. So from in Upper West, Upper East, Northern, Brong-Ahafo, Volta region, Greater Accra. I mean, the offices were all over, but we needed to go through quite an organizational transformation. And guess what, Daniel? I was clueless. I was like, knowing my women's rights, knowing my policy analysis, that's not what is needed now. I had people who could do the policy analysis. I had amazing people who could do the women's rights. What was being asked of me was the ability to rally 120 people around a vision for change. And I was lost. So that was my first time when I started to open my eyes to say, wait a minute, this leadership thing is not something that you pick from air just because you've been given the position. You immediately know what it is. So that was a deep awareness. The other thing I started to notice, Daniel, is that when I would meet other country directors from ActionAid offices across the globe, whether they're in Latin America, whether they're on this continent, whether they're coming from Asia, I would always notice that the country programs that were doing the best, in terms of they were having a huge impact, they were able to raise money, the staff were happy, those were the ones that had very strong leadership. And I started to say, you know what? This thing, I can clearly see everything rises and falls on leadership, as John Maxwell says it. And I didn't have to go too far. It wasn't just ActionAid. I could start to look at our nations, our communities, our mosques, our churches, our companies. I could immediately tell the wealth, the success of that particular body of people was so dependent on the quality of leadership. But what I also realized, Daniel, was too many people were like me. They had been thrust into leadership positions without really having a clue, because so much leadership is about other human beings, and human beings are complicated, or where I love us to death as human beings, but we're not simple. So that was my awareness. So luckily, I was able to get support. I got an amazing coach. And even when I saw how much he supported me, I thought, that's something I want to do. But as I deepened my leadership skills while at ActionAid and could see the impact it was having on the organization, that's when the bug hit me. That's when I fell in love with leadership, because I thought, if we go back to this theme about transforming Africa, I thought, my goodness, if we can get the leadership right on this continent, what again? Then we would have gotten so I kept feeling like, in terms of what is that one thing? It's not around water, it's not around education, it's not around peace and conflict. What is that one thing that for me was standing out as something to unlock the potential of this continent? And it was leadership. So that's my journey into leadership.
And what is the kind of leadership that Africa needs?
It's not a simple one. It's many things, huh? Because Africa is complex. Huh? So for one, it's definitely, so I'll throw in a couple of words that reflect it. But it's for one, it's self-aware, it's empowering, it's transformative, it's inclusive, it's bold, it's courageous. Those are some of the elements of the type of leadership that this continent needs.
Unpack.
Aha. So what are the words you got? So I think one of the things I first said, it's self-aware. Huh? So what do I mean by that? I find that on this continent, our relationship with people in leadership roles, particularly when we look at a lot of our cultural norms, those in leadership roles have been chiefs, kings, people, again, maybe religious leaders. And there's a lot of power, respect, and therefore high levels of hierarchy bestowed on people in leadership positions. Huh? Now, we all know that, what is that saying about power corrupts? And and corrupts absolutely? Yes, yes.
Absolute power corrupts absolutely.
There you go. Huh? And so what is the vaccine? What is the antidote to ensuring that when you're in a leadership position on this continent, where everybody wants to hold your bag, where nobody will tell you the truth because you know you are Oga, because you are Reverend so-and-so, because you're Director so-and-so, it means the antidote to not letting the power go to your head is your deep levels of self-awareness. Your ability to check yourself, because guess what? Chances are others won't check you. So that's where the self-awareness comes. You are actually able to know yourself well, see yourself in the moment, and check yourself in the moment. So that's why the self-awareness is so particularly important in our context. In other contexts, let's say I take a Scandinavian system where there's very flat structure. They don't care who you are, or if you're the boss, whatever, they'll tell you as it is. They're constant checks on those who have power. Constant. It's part of their history. It's part of their particularly when you look at their governance. That's so for them, whether if you're not self-aware, somebody will still pull you back. But here again, because of so many of the trappings of leadership, if you're not careful, if you're not self-aware, you can easily lose your way. So hence, that's why self-awareness, I say, is very important. What was the second one I said?
You shifted to empowering.
Yes, good. Empowering was the second one.
Empowering is transformative.
Yeah. Empowering is so important, very much tied to also the first point in terms of the hierarchy, because unfortunately, in many instances on this continent, power is not shared equally. Power is either held, if I think about it economically, is held by a group of elites. If I think about it in terms of age, is held by often older folks. When I think about it in terms of gender, it's held by primarily men. So you can see in so many respects, there's lots of inequality in terms of how power is managed, and power is managed by those in leadership positions. So if you find yourself in a leadership position on this continent, you're in a very privileged position. And so one of the key things that is incumbent, if we're going to transform and change the rules of the game, where you constantly see the kind of inequity I just described, is that you have to be the kind of leader that's constantly bringing up people, encouraging people, coaching people, making sure that people feel confident, whether they're a woman, whether they're young, whether they're from any particular group that is marginalized. That's the importance of the empowering leadership. So that's why empowering. The transformative comes, there's so much to change. If you're a leader on this continent and all you're doing is maintaining the status quo, you're just a manager. I think it's literally incumbent. There is too much that needs to be transformed and changed. And when I say transformed, for me, I use that word quite intentionally, because to me, change is just where, if you imagine if people are playing musical chairs, and all of a sudden people, you say, oh, music has started, now go change the chairs. People change the seats. Same people still sitting on the same chairs. Transformation is where you just remove all the chairs, they sit on the floor. We're not even playing this game anymore. We're playing a completely different game. And so for me, it's not what this continent needs. It's not just change, but it's actual transformation, because the rules of the game need to change. Too many people on this continent, in this country, are not benefiting the way a few elites are benefiting. So that's why I say transformative.
And it has to be bold. It has to be courageous.
Ah, yes, bold. The boldness comes. You have to have a big vision. Huh? I mean, I think there's a certain level of urgency. All of us need to start dreaming big in terms of the kinds of transformation we want to bring about. We can't be tinkering around in the margins. Things are urgent in terms of the kinds of changes we want to bring. It needs to be courageous, because changing the status quo is very hard on this continent. We're very conservative people. We're conservative, and we are, I think one of our strengths definitely is Ubuntu. I am, because we are, we're people who are very connected. There's a deep premium put on belonging. I belong to this family, I belong to this clan, I belong to this church, I belong to this alumni association, these groups of belonging. Now, when you want to bring about change and transformation, it might mean that you're rubbing against the way things have always been done by the group. And so people might start to say, oh, you too, why do you want to do this differently? Oh, now what again? You're always trying to come up with these new things. Why can't you just go with the flow? Why don't... So you have to be courageous to stand alone to drive change. And when you think about some of the biggest change makers, the people who made the huge difference on this continent, many of them had moments where they had to stand alone. That's why the courage.
Wow.